Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week has been a total pain in the ass. What I mean by that is that I had my first colonoscopy. And while I usually keep talk about anal out of the podcast, I feel like it's important to share the story of having a camera stuck up my ass. The good news is I don't have colon cancer. I did have one polyp removed, and I should be good to go for another 10 years before I need to get my colon checked again. And I highly encourage all of you to schedule a colonoscopy when you're eligible by your insurance. While it's not fun, and the stuff they make you drink to prep makes it so you pee out of your butt for a couple of days, it will give you the comfort of knowing that you are healthy. So while a colonoscopy isn't a walk in the park, it's better than where I was the next day. I was at chemotherapy with my wife, Ange. And for all of you asking and wondering, Ange is doing well. The first 8 days after chemo really suck, every time. Lots of nausea, a painful mouth, tiredness, numb fingers and toes, just a lot of different things going on, none of them pleasant. But by about day 9, she's totally normal for a few days. I mean, she still will get tired quickly, but she can pretty much do everything. And it's really awesome to see her be happy for a couple of days. She really needs that. And another thing that's really made her happy is all the support we've been getting from so many friends. And I do need to thank all of the folks that have contributed to our meal train. There are so many people who've been asking how they can help. And while I feel like we have our bases covered with this thing, Ange created a meal train for those who kept asking and wondering what they could do for us. Thank you to everyone who has signed up and cooked for us. I will say that we do grade every meal, and everyone has delivered a B+ dish or higher. So it's like everybody's going out of their way to cook their best dishes and deliver them to us. And I can't tell you how appreciated that is. It makes life a lot easier. And for everybody else wondering how they can help on this end who just know me through the podcast, if I feel like we need your help in the future, I definitely will ask you. But know that right now, me and my family are in a good place, and Ange is on the way to recovery, although it is going to be a long road. So thank you for that. Now it's time for an episode that I'm really excited about. It's time to take a trip back to the 70s and the hot dog movement that was a huge deal in skiing for almost a decade. My guest this week is Phil Sifferman, a true rebel with a cause. And this podcast is a history lesson that dives deep into Phil's life and times, which include Kenny Loggins, Jimi Hendrix, the hot dog movement, the death of it, connecting snowboarding with the FIS, and so much more. It's a must listen for everyone, skiers, snowboarders, everyone. But before we get into it, I want to ask you to please tell a friend about the show. Good podcasts are hard to find for some reason, and I want your friends listening to the best in snow. So tell them about the Powell movement, and they will have that. They'll have over 300 hours of content to listen to. It'll make them happy, it'll make me happy, and I thank you so much for doing that. I also want to ask you to support my incredible sponsors who make this show happen. I only work with the best, and they are Puffin Drinkware, Best Day Brewing, Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Stanley. Now, it's time to talk with Phil Sifferman. So I think it's important to start these things off with very random things, and with you, I'm going to start with fame in your family. Were you tight with your famous cousin, Kenny Loggins, when you were growing up?
Yeah, very tight.
So when he's on his rise in the music business, were you two in touch throughout that whole time?
Yeah, we were. Kenny was born in Everett, Washington. His dad and my mom, who were brother and sisters, they moved out from Butte, Montana, as their dad was a traveling salesman. And so they grew up in the Seattle area on Capitol Hill. Kenny's dad, Bob, moved up to Everett, and Kenny was born there. And about the time Kenny was 9 or 10 years old, they moved to Alhambra in Los Angeles, as his dad had other salesmanship work down there. But Kenny was already picking the guitar. So around the age of 9 or 10 years old, he started off with country songs, so it was Old Home on the Range, and I was kind of not interested in listening. But when we'd go and visit, he's 5 years older than me, but yeah, I'm probably as close as a family member as he's got. We've done so much stuff over the years. It's been really cool.
Have you worked with him in a professional manner or in just fun stuff?
Oh, yeah. We did professional stuff, too. I mean, he was the musician in the family and I was the skier, but we were both kind of rebels, and we could say easy enough the black sheep. And, Kenny was off on his own career down there in L.A. doing whatever he could, studio work, and trying to get anything he could get before he wrote Danny's song. That was his breakout song, and getting together with Jimmy Messina. But, I was off in the ski world, which is really far from the music world. But about the time his career was really peaking, my ski career had moved into an era where I was now trying to do promotion work for commercials, etc. So I soon had come back to Kenny saying, what is the best way to get at this artist or that? And eventually tied Kenny up with some sponsorships where he sung songs for beer companies in Japan. And then that produced tours that went through Japan and China and the Pacific. So we've done a whole bunch of commercial work together.
Nice. And we know he likes to get footloose, but is he a skier?
Oh, yeah, he's a killer. This guy's a natural athlete and he can rip. We were at North Star last time we were skiing together and got really good shots of him. You know, he's probably 6'2" or something. He's the lanky side of the family, but he fits really well for his height into skiing. And he's also a good golfer, sailor. Yeah.
Nice. And so while we're on the music topic, you grew up in Capitol Hill, Seattle. And did you ever go to school or see Jimi Hendrix around?
Yeah. I went to the same junior high as Jimi Hendrix. He went to Meany, if you didn't know. That's the one that's on 19th and Thomas. So Jim would have been 10 years older. But I'm glad that you brought that up. One of my most fave memories of life was being there in ninth grade at Meany Junior High. And the principal had sent out an announcement, there's going to be a student assembly in the assembly hall. And we thought, oh, yeah, really? What the it's 3 o'clock. I want to go. 3:15, he's standing there. This is the classic. I mean, you could say you can't make this up, but you can. The principal standing up there on stage with the curtain drawn. And he goes, well, got a special guest to introduce you to and used to go to school here. And he's back in town. They roll back the curtains. Jimi Hendrix is standing there with his guitar. And he's got one speaker and he's got his foot up on it. And I don't know if you've ever heard interviews of him, but he's a slow talking, kind of well-considered, thoughtful guy and what he has to say. And he kind of goes, I know you guys are too young to get into the Coliseum tonight, but I've been away in England where they talk funny and I got together with a couple of guys and we got these songs that are hitting. But anyway, there's two songs that I'm going to play tonight at the Coliseum for the first time ever, but I'm going to play them for you right now.
No way.
Yeah, wait. And then the guy sits down at his speaker and he picks the guitar a little bit and he sings two songs. And for the life of me, I can't tell you which two they are because this was the beginning of us memorizing and just adapting every Jimi Hendrix song he ever made. But right after school, my buddy Dave McCann and I went down to the Coliseum and we got in the back door and we saw that the front was absolutely packed with people trying to buy tickets. And we walked around the backside and we saw that these buses were pulling up and they were showing badges and going through a back door. And I said, badge, show a badge. I said, what do you got? And he goes, well, I got a library card. And I said, well, get our library cards out. And so we got up our nerve and now it's about 6 o'clock at night. And we just walked like we own the place up towards the back door of the Coliseum, holding our library cards up. And the guard opens the door up and lets us in. So now we go, now what the fuck? We're in the back of the Coliseum. There's people bustling everywhere, got jobs to do. So we find this back emergency exit stairwell that goes up. And we go up and up and up until we get to a chain. And the chain blocks it because we're up now at the roof. And these are the catwalks that stripe across the top of the Coliseum. Anyways, here's the end of the story. It's pitch black up there. We walk out. The warm-up band, I think it was Janis Joplin. But we went up there and sat on these cat racks, hanging our feet over, watching the mosh pit form, and it gets ready, and then the whole place goes dark, and we go, now's our chance. And so we went back off the catwalks, and down in and jumped over fences, and we were down in the mosh pit for Jimmy's first concert in Seattle. It was perfect.
That is amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. So you grow up in a huge family in Capitol Hill. There's like 11 kids. And where do you fit in that mix? Are you like in the middle?
Yeah, I'm in the middle. I'm the seventh child, fourth son, seventh child.
When you're in that kind of mix, it's probably easy to get lost in the shuffle, and that probably gives you the freedom to go out and on a Friday night and just go try to break into the Coliseum and see Jimi Hendrix shows. Was that life? Did you have a ton of freedom because of the kids?
Yeah, exactly. I had another life-changing experience. I don't know how old I was, maybe 8 or 10. I came to my dad and I said, Dad, I need 10 cents for, can I have 10 cents? And he goes, what do you need it for? And I said, well, that's what a bar ice cream costs. I want a bar ice cream. He said, Phil, if I give you 10 cents, I got 10 other kids here that need 10 cents. No, go figure it out. I never went back and asked him for another penny. And I really thank him for giving me the enlightened motivation there to go, yeah, if I want 10 cents, I got to go out and get it. So that was a good thing.
It seems like you're not a rule follower either from just hearing that Coliseum story as well. But with you in school, I think you went to Catholic school, and I think maybe not being a rule follower gets you in trouble. And do you get kicked out of Catholic school?
Yes, that's right. We started off at St. Joe's, and I wasn't academically oriented. And so normally most of the good Catholics at St. Joe's would go to Seattle Prep immediately. But I ended up at Jimi Hendrix School because I didn't get in the first year at Seattle Prep. I had to go to Meany. I was tutored and did everything I could to improve the grades so that I could get into Seattle Prep in my sophomore year. But my time at Seattle Prep, I think I was only there 2 months when I had an incident with the priest, the vice principal of the school, and that would land me in a world of shit. Is that the story you wanted to hear?
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to know what you did, but if you don't feel like sharing it, you don't have to tell us.
Yeah, I mean, this was the moment that really turned everything around for my life. Seattle Prep was an all-boys school. You know, there was the kind of school where these priests would stand over you and ask you a question, 2 times 4 plus 5. And you don't answer, they'd start rapping you on the head with a knuckle. And when a guy's hitting you on the head with a knuckle, it's not helping the situation out. But they would physically hit you and like that. And one of the priests, his name was Father Sitter. He was sadistic as hell. This guy wore on his Jesuit uniform a belt, which was a barber strap. That's a thick leather strap that the barbers used to sharpen their razor blades. Anyways, it was there as a threat that he would whip people with his belt. So one day we were playing intramural in this all-boys school, and I had not brought the right shorts to school, so I borrowed somebody's Oshkosh, Bagosh, Farmer John's, and I had to tie them up at the waist. Well, another guy, Joe Cannon, and myself, we were accomplished basketball players, and on a breakaway, I knew when I was going up for a layup, if I didn't continue to hold on these pants, they're going to drop. And so I thought I'd get a laugh. I certainly did. As I went up for layup, I let the pants go. I make the layup. The pants drop and the student body cracks up because isn't that funny that somebody drops their pants on a layup? It just worked for everybody except for that sadistic Father Sitter. A kid runs out onto the court and said, "You're to report to the bottom of the stairwell after the intramural game." And that's really bad news because there's a 4-floor stairwell that goes up at Seattle Prep, and kids could line the stairwell all the way up like a little coliseum, and he would beat children at the bottom, and people can watch. Most of the student body could crowd in there and watch. I wasn't going to show up for that because this is all bullshit. So I went and hid down in the restrooms in the basement. And, pretty soon I heard my name calling out, and he sent out the letterman to find me. I was hiding with my feet up on the Powell bowl. And they came in, but my feet didn't touch the ground from that restroom all the way up to front of Father Sitter's. They just wrapped me up, took me up there and sat in front of me. Now he's purple in the face and he's foaming at the mouth. And he goes, "I was going to give you 3. Now I'm going to give you 5. He goes, "Bend over." And I said, "No, I'm not bending over and I'm not taking any hacks from you." So then he stood back and they grabbed me and they held me over and he beat the shit out of me. But that isn't what hurt the most. What hurt the most is when he grabbed my ear afterwards and dragged me into the principal's office, threw me into a chair. I thought my ear was going to come off. I couldn't move fast enough to stay with him. And that guy, he turned to the principal and he said, "This kid is to be kicked out of this school immediately or I quit." And I went, "What?" "What?" And I heard the principal, he said, "Oh, Father Sitter." Then he turns to me in the most masculine of voice and goes, "You're out. Get your stuff. You're out of here." And I went, oh, I thought my word fell apart. And Mike, this is the most profound paradigm moment in my life because this would throw me right into the ski world and the best thing would happen. But also, this is one of those paradigm moments in my life where a crisis that looks like everything's falling apart is actually the trigger that was going to launch you into something super great. When I was at Meany the year before, I had a horrible experience where I ended up having to testify against a group of kids that all end up in jail. And they were black. Their jail sentence was only 6 months long. But when they got out of jail, they were at Garfield. And now that I was getting kicked out of prep, the school that serviced our district was Garfield. And these kids that got out of jail, they'd been indoctrinated in a new self-help organization for blacks. And they were now running the Garfield chapter of the Black Panthers. I go, fuck. I got 4 Black Panthers looking for me at Garfield. And my dad warned everybody in the family, says, "If you ever get kicked out of school, you go down to Providence Hospital and get yourself a room because I'll put you in the hospital." I can't go to Garfield. I can't go home. I'm on the street. And it was 2 weeks that I was living in a friend's basement, not knowing what to do, that I thought, I heard that it's okay over there at Queen Anne High School, but I don't know anybody. I don't even know where it is. So I went down to 4th and Pike in downtown Seattle where I'd seen the name on a bus, waited till I saw the name, took the bus up to Queen Anne and talked my way into the school. And guess what? Everybody at the school was skiing. And that was the beginning of my ski career.
Just hearing that you were kicked out of school, kicked out of the house, and you were able to figure out a way back into school, because it seems like throughout your whole career and everything that I look at, it's like yeah, you're a pro skier, but you're doing all this shit behind the scenes too. So it's like you always have a good head on your shoulders, even if you are breaking the rules of how to move life forward. And it starts right there with you get it kicked out of school and you go find another school on your own, because there's a lot of kids who wouldn't go find another school on their own. They'd live in their friends' basements until they have to go groveling back home or figure out something to do with life. So it's cool that you were able to make that thing happen. Then you said you went to Queen Anne and all the people there were going skiing on the weekends and just disappearing. Is this when you start hitchhiking to Snoqualmie Pass and figuring out skiing on your own?
That's right. First thing I heard at the school is everybody going, oh, the snow was this deep and this and that. And I'd been skiing, but just as, a gaper running up and down the hill. But it was like everybody was going skiing. So I went to my parents and I said, I told you that I couldn't get a dime out of my dad. When I told my mom I wanted to go skiing, then she hits me with another paradigm shifter. She goes, Phil, you don't want to go skiing. I go, why? She goes, well, you're going to meet a girl up there that's going to want something from you that you're not able to give her. Well, that girl that she's talking about is in the other room. And it was like, God, that's not a deal breaker. So I got her to drop me off down at Rainier Avenue where I-90 comes in. Where I'm 14? And I stood outside a store there and asked the first guy by if he'd buy a bottle of wine for me. And I put a bottle of Ripple wine in my coat and I take it up to Snoqualmie, where I knew the lift operators were these podunks out in North Bend. Back then, North Bend was like out in the boonies in a big way. And so I knew that if I told the North Bender, which was probably my age, 15, 16 years old, hold on this bottle of wine, he wouldn't bum me for a ticket. So that's how I was getting on the ski lesson the first year. I didn't have money for a ticket. I barely had money for the equipment that I was getting one way or another, kind of mischievously sometimes. Yeah, so that's how I got started. And I didn't have a place to stay either. Up at Ski Acres, they had a ski pole shack where they kept the slalom gates. And I'd stay out as late as I could, wherever I could, until everything's closing up. And then I'd go to this shack. They didn't have any electricity or heat in any kind, just had slalom poles in it. And I'd kind of shuffle them so they'd kind of slant a bit, and I'd lay up against them. And by 6 a.m, the cafeterias were open up so I could go out and get warm there. But yeah, I froze from 2 a.m. till 6 trying to stay warm in a slalom pole shack.
So it must have been so loose at your house if you're able to just leave and go hitchhike to Snoqualmie Pass on the weekends. Yeah. And nobody even notices that you're gone until like Sunday night. Or actually, are you even at home, or did you move back into the house?
Yeah, I was only some 3-4 weeks out before my mom started opening the door of the basement. But I had to hide from my dad for a year or so until he got over the trauma of me getting kicked out of the private school that, finishing up how I got into Queen Anne. So I got to the school up there and then they said I had to see the principal because who are you? Why are you showing up here in November? And the principal said, where are you coming from? And I said, well, I just live down the street. He goes, well, how about before that? And I wasn't thinking sharp enough to lie. And I said, well, I come from Capitol Hill. Then he looks at my name and he says, hey, listen, Mr. Sifferman, you kids from Capitol Hill that are supposed to be going to Garfield, you just can't go out of your school district and think that we could get in here. But here's what you do. You write a letter, you mail it into the superintendent of schools of Seattle. He'll answer you in a few weeks. If he says it's okay, you're in. So I remember seeing his name on the desk there with Mr. Thompson. I said, listen, Principal Thompson, I'm out of school. I'm out of the street. I don't want to be on the street. I want to go to school. I don't got time to write letters and send them off to random people. And I watched this guy's shoulders shrug and he picks up the phone and he dials a number. I thought he was going to cry. Next thing you know, he sits up straight and he goes, good morning, sir. Yes, sir. So Mr. S, I'm sitting here, sir, with Mr. Sifferman. He goes, what? What? And he turns to me and he goes, is your dad's name Tom? And I go, oh, yeah, it is. And then he tells you, yes, it is. Hangs up the phone. He goes, who's your dad? He says, you're in. So the superintendent of the schools of Seattle was Ray Boitano, who played basketball at Seattle Prep with my dad.
Huh.
Here I was trying to run from my dad, and he was my free ticket to get into another school. So to me, that was a great story.
So how often are you able to go skiing once you get into all these schools and you hitchhike? Are you able to go every weekend with all your other buddies?
Yeah. It only took a while before I found better ways of getting up the hill. And when I turned 16 and got my first car, was driving up there. But I only slept in that ski pole shack maybe 5-6 times, 6 weeks in a row before one morning I was rudely awakened by the door opened up. And this guy, goes, what the hell are you doing in here? And I stood up, and I'm 5'7". If I stand up and you're not more than 5'7", we're probably going to fight. And I stood up and this little guy, he was an old boy, he must have been 40. And he's standing there waking me up. And I said, I'm trying to sleep. What the fuck does it look like I'm doing? And he goes, damn, you think you can carry some poles up the hill? And I said, yeah, like where? And he said, well, to the top, like over here, the chair. I said, yeah. He goes, wait here. And he goes away and he comes back and he goes, listen, tonight you sleep up in the employees' dormitory with the cooks from North Bend. And I go, damn, here we go. And he says, you just help me carry the poles up here at the top and come back at 4:00 and help me bring them back down. We got you covered. And then I was in tight with the very guys I was giving wine to let me on the lift for free. And so it was a step-by-step kind of maneuvering my way into the ski world up there.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start the year off with a new sponsor I'm really excited to tell you about, Best Day Brewing. Yeah, I love a good craft beer, but finally I found a full-flavored, full-bodied, full-aromaed craft beer without the alcohol to slow me down. Because really, life is full of moments that deserve a great beer, but not the booze. And the blind taste tests I've done prove that you won't be able to tell the difference between a Best Day and your favorite IPA or Kolsch. What I really love about Best Day is that I get a low-calorie, low-sugar brew that goes perfect with driving home. And to celebrate 2023, please join me in participating in Dry January. I'm not asking any of you to quit drinking, because that's not what this is all about. I just want to see if everybody can do it for a month, or even a few weeks, and if you can't, well, that's another conversation. But whether you're an athlete, a desk jockey, a biker, an entrepreneur, a runner, a walker, a hiker, a skier, a snowboarder, you deserve to have your best day yet too. So next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Best Day Brewing, and if you can't find some at the store, you can always head on over to bestdaybrewing.com to get yourself a 6-pack of tasty flavor. My next sponsor is Puffin Drinkware. What's a puffin? Think a parka, a spacesuit, a life jacket for your beverage that's built with insulation technology, complete with a thermal liner for colder sips to the very last drop. Yeah, a puffin will keep your drink cold until the last drop, but it'll also make you the king or queen of whatever room or party you're in, as everyone's going to notice your puffin and start asking you questions about it. And while you're going to want to answer all of their questions about that parka or life vest or spacesuit or countless other silhouettes that Puffin creates, you and everyone else will be focused on talking about how cute your personality-infused beverage apparel is. And I want every one of you to head over to puffindrinkware.com to pick up a puffin for yourself. You need one of these. And while you're at it, buy one for a friend and have fun together. And Puffin is going to make that easier than ever for you to do. They're going to save you 20% off all Puffin orders, and all you need to do is go shopping at puffindrinkware.com, and when you head to checkout, enter the code POWELMOVEMENT, that's all lowercase, all one word, no spaces, and you will save 20% off your Puffin drinkware, and you will have the cutest drinkware in the entire planet. My final sponsor is Elan Skis, and I'm in love with both my Ripsticks 106 Black Edition and my Ripsticks 96 Black Edition. They are so fun and lively, all while remaining light and stable. And I'm not the only person who thinks these skis ski better than the competition. Both of these skis were named the editor's pick in Free Skiers magazine test this year. And combined, Elan won over 65 awards in 2022. Great products is why you're seeing more Elan skis on the hill. And making you a better skier is how they've been building a cult following here in the US. But what's really amazing about the brand is that they built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art factory, which means Elan is powered by renewable energy. They've also shortened the supply chain, and now 70% of Elan's materials come from within 250 miles of their factory. And the innovative digital printing technology they're using has already saved 32 tons of volatile waste since 2016. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When you think about ski culture, by the time you graduate high school, sure, you had Warren Miller and Dick Barrymore films out there, but I feel like there were a few game-changing movies that became almost a keyhole view into what the future of freestyle is going to be. And what kind of impact did Ski the Outer Limits and the Mobius Flip have on skiers back then?
Well, those were the big ones. And Warren Miller and Dick Barrymore weren't involved with those. Those were from standard films.
Yep.
But there at Queen Anne High School, partway through the winter, we get called into the auditorium again, and they showed these films. Ski the Outer Limits and then Mobius Flip. And my goodness, what a surprise to see that people were just smiling and laughing and hucking jumps off of the crazy places in the mountains. And 40 years later, my good buddy Stan Larsen also went to Queen Anne. He gave me both of those films on a DVD, and it was a shocker to me when I put on the first one. They start off these films with a 1-minute montage where you get little quick flashes of everywhere that you're going to see in the film coming up. And I watched this thing start up and I went, okay, there's Sun Valley, Crystal Mountain, Verbier, Chamonix, Davos. And I go, holy shit. And as the montage went off, I went, I've been at every place in that montage.
Huh.
And so I look back and I just get chills thinking, that was like the map of my life that was rolling out in front of me. I had no idea. And then 40 years later, I had no idea that I actually went out and went to damn near every place that it was in that film. And so, yeah, deja vu.
So crazy. And I mean, when you think of it, it's like the precursor to hot dog skiing. When you start seeing this stuff on the big screen, is that when kids start building jumps and doing aerials?
Yep, exactly. So at the very beginning, people think that Stig Eriksson, no, what's Eriksson? What's his name?
Stein?
Stein was the guy that came over in the 50s after his Olympic debut. And, Stein is the beginner of freestyle. Well, that's not true. If you ask Stein Eriksson, I had the chance to do that. Stein, who was the godfather of freestyle, it was the Rude brothers back in the 1928, 29, 30. That's where that started. But Stein introduced it to Tom Leroy and these guys that were American skiers. And they are the ones that are in standard films, Mobius Flip, Ski the Outer Limits. And so this sport really took off as an American sport from its roots. And when we saw thnothose things, we went up to Snoqualmie Summit and those places and would just pack snow on the backside of a tree stump and thought, okay, if we hit this, I mean, it wasn't really thought of where you're going to land. It was just like, we need something that with a little arc to it going up so we can actually flip over. So it was raw. In the early days, there was no understanding of the mechanics that it took to make something work. So this was really early days of hot dog skiing.
The part that I don't get about the whole thing is when I look at images of the hot doggers of the 70s, everyone looks so cool. I mean, you just look at everybody's outfits, their facial hair. They just have a cool that people try to buy today, but they can't. But then there was the whole ballet part of skiing. How the hell did that get into the mix?
It's a good question. Jumping and mogul skiing and then ballet, they were all like rebel sports. Skiing was such a tied down, buttoned up occupation. And the people that went skiing, I saw something recently, it was the film about the origin of snowboarding. And you look at those skiers that were up there, the early snowboarders, Burton and Sims, and these guys were trying to go up the hill. I look at the skiers that they were skiing around. These guys look like total nerds, geeks with the regular ski guys. And the only guys that were cool were the snowboarders. Well, in that evolution, hot dogging was the same way. We were disliked by racers, disliked by the ski instructors. They parlayed against things that we wanted to do. And there were places we weren't allowed to go or build a jump and this and that. So freestyle skiing was, to me, the first one that really was the rebel cause. And you asked the question about what was ballet. Well, it wasn't ballet in the beginning. It was trick skiing. And as the trick skiing became refined, it became ballet skiing. But in the very beginning, Mike, to do a crossover and a Royal Christie and then tip stand, this was tricks. And you were linking tricks together. And it wasn't until artistic type persons, Susie Chaffee to be at the very head of that, started linking all these to one to another and let's play music and turn it into a ballet dance. That's how it became ballet. It was linking together tricks. When at the beginning it was just if you pulled off one trick, that was enough. We didn't need to see number two. But then we started doing it, put it into a competition format, and then I was all downhill from there.
In the beginning of it all, when you think about the product that you guys are skiing on, with aerials, are you still on like 215s and just huge skis?
Well, 215s would have only been for the Glenda sprungs and long jumps like that. But when I was doing aerials, I jumped on 200s, and we thought it was a big change to go down to 195s. And then somebody suggested, do you think we could go down to 190? Because it's so much ski to bring around. It's so much tip to get underneath you for the landing. There was absolutely no thought at all that you'd be jumping on 150s like they do today. But the best shots I have of me, I'm up stretched out in a nice jump, and my skis are just huge.
And people used to yell at you from the lift if you were on short skis, right? Like there's some phrase like big skis truck or something like that.
Yeah, there's all kinds of little insults that you can dream up. But when we had the World Championships in snowbird in 75, I remember something really derogatory was on a billboard at the bottom of the valley. And when I went to the podium to get my award, I said something derogatory to those. Yeah. There was a lot of pushback to being different. And the guys at snowboarding who really revitalized the whole rebel and be out there being cool, I mean, they had an uphill slog from the beginning. It was totally unfair, uncalled for, but they revitalized winter sports. And I was really glad to see the birth of snowboarding because unfortunately, I was the guy that brought FIS into the sponsorship of snowboarding back in 1995. with a very specific reason for how it all ended up that way when it all belonged in the ISF territory. But by the time the International Federation gets a hold of something, it has to standardize it because it is the sanctioning body. And that means that it has to make it equal for everybody. If you're from Biafra or Congo or the States, they've got to be a standard rule that can be applied like a cookie cutter. So it takes all of the creativity and freedom and self-expression out and replaces it with predictable standardization.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think you poisoned snowboarding with the FIS coming in and giving it all its rules and regulations. You just procured a lot of money for the FIS to be able to have these contests, right? Like in that business, you were more a partnership marketing guy getting a ton of money for this to have snowboarding, right?
The correct way to look at that period would be snowboarding was becoming so popular that it needed to arrive at the Olympics. The Olympics is the ultimate sanctioning body. I mean, you can't go more tied down than the Olympic structure. In order to be in the Olympic structure, you have to come from an acceptable sporting institution. Back in 1995, 6, 7, when 98 was going to be the introduction of snowboarding to the Olympics was tasked with how can we sanction an ISF event when they openly behave in a way that we can't accept it. There's open dope smoking and they did things. They're in the rules. You can't do that. And so there was a clear choice by the IOC, International Olympic Committee, that we need a sanctioning body that we can count on to follow global rules. And that's the way it is. So when I had Nokia as a company that I was making its placements for them, they asked me, we want to be in a sporting platform where we are able to communicate that we're youthful and young and not mainstream. And so mainstream is slalom, downhill, and all of the mainstreams. We want to be non-mainstream. I said, well, you have to be in snowboarding. So I went and met with the top guys at the ISF in Europe and met with the guys from FIS. And I had to go back to the people at Nokia, which are from Finland, and say, well, look, here's your choices. And when I met with ISF guys, I thought this is going to be really risky. If we go ISF, we won't be chosen for the Olympic procurer of disciplines. If we go with the FIS, we will have an avenue for it because clearly the IOC, and I know the IOC guys quite well because marketing people from IOC were, many of them, Michael Payne to be the key one, were freestyle skiers in the beginning. And so I was making a clear calculation of, well, what does it take to be on the right side so we're involved with this progression of the sport up to the Olympics. And for that, we had to go with FIS. And I knew from the beginning, this is the wrong thing to do. The right thing would be sticking with how cool it is. And even though the Finnish company is extremely conservative and all of that, there's just no way in hell you can make them rationalize to them that having drugs around as part of the atmosphere is okay. It just was not okay. And that was the deal breaker.
And is that a total departure than maybe what you would have thought at 20 years old? That's something that you did when you're 40?
How do you mean, Mike?
If you're 20 years old and you were deciding the future of freestyle skiing, would you have voted it being a 20-year-old to keep it cool and not sell it out? But then as you get older, you might vote to sell it out for maybe the health of the long term of the sport?
Yeah, no, I see what you say. And that also ties back to the rationale about doing it for money. The thing that needs to be looked at, and I think that Terry Hawkinson and guys that were having the real charge, they had it right when they said that it's a total sellout to be competing at all. And so what is this format of going out and showing how we could be creative and cool and try new things if we're locked into a regimen, a standardization of how you can behave? I mean, freestyle skiing in the FIS today, there's nothing free about it at all. It's a gymnastic. I mean, they lost the word free 20 or 30 years ago. Freestyle skiing used to be an expression of freedom. And, hot dogging came from surfing and with snowboarding. So I'm not going to be making explanations for why it was the right thing to do to fund competitions. We're just marketing and we got a client that's ready to spend millions. The measurement of are you successful is do they come back again and again and again and again. And this was an successful operation. But the real challenging thing, I think Terry Hawkinson put it up right. He goes, why are we even competing at all? That's not the spirit of the sport. And when you make competitions and now you have sanctioning rules, you have to do it on a configuration that forms this way and that way. The freedom goes out the window and the creativity. And I don't think any of that's cool. It's exciting to watch once or twice, but free riding is the coolest stuff. That I'm glad to see that's, to me, the predominant interesting thing in sports.
Well, FIS just bought them as well, so we'll see what happens to that whole group.
Yeah, I know. Oh, God.
But that's another conversation. Back to the hot dog movement. The seeds are planted in the late 60s. And by 1971, I think there's two events that almost happened simultaneously or within a couple weeks. One in Canada, one in Aspen. And were you aware of the events or like the World Championships? Were you at them or do you know what I'm talking about?
The Aspen one, was that the Dick Barrymore event?
It's like on the Bell Mountain or whatever?
Right. No, I wasn't at those yet. I was getting out of school that year.
Do you hear about that kind of stuff, though? Or is it the thing that there's not that much media, so all this new stuff happening, you're not going to hear until the next magazine comes out?
Yeah, or the next year, or if it made it into a Warren Miller or Dick Barrymore film. So, yeah, the information like that didn't get around. Which was the one in Canada that you're talking about? Is it Whistler?
Yeah, I think there was one at Whistler, and I think there was one in Aspen. I'm getting this all from Dick Barrymore's book, but I haven't read it in like 10 years. I used to be a pretty good historian of this stuff, and I haven't read it in a long time.
Yeah. He wrote a book called Breaking Even.
Breaking Even, that was it.
Yeah, Dick was on the front edge, He's like the filmmakers today at Matchstick and like that. They got great ideas. And, he had the wet T-shirt contest and skiing Bell Mountain and Aspen and then taking it over to Sun Valley. That was 71. It was 72 when I joined, and I studied filmmaking at Queen Anne High School. And my first job was for Allsop, going out and filming the Allsop demonstration team that were competing in Sun Valley in these freestyle events. And I did that for 1 year, and by the next year, I was skiing in them myself.
Nice. So that's kind of how the sponsorship thing works for you, is like you figure out filming in high school, which is amazing for back then, making like high 8 tapes.
Back then, it was Super 8 film. But the big issue at the time in 1970, 71 was that the Vietnam War was on, and we were just a couple of years away from being drafted into the war ourselves. And so our film teacher, who was just fresh out of the university, he made a big thing about the government's dropping millions of bombs on Vietnam, but they're giving no money for free film for our class. So any one of the students that went out and bought a $2.50 roll of film and paid for it, $2.50 developing, automatically you get an A for subsidizing the U.S. government. I went out so fast you couldn't believe it. I bought 2 rolls of film just to double up on getting that A because I was going to be flunking every other class. And that was the inspiration. We were in a really strange time with Vietnam messing with all of us and, the threat of having to go over there. And it wasn't until 71 that good old Nixon stops the draft and we begin the withdrawal. But yeah, you had to go out and take care of yourself. And that's how I got into filmmaking. And I just loved shooting film. And I got this promoter, Pat Deneen. That's Deneen, whose son went up and was the mogul skier at the Olympics in Canada, did so well.
Mm-hmm.
Pat was a promoter up at Hayek, and he also did work for Allsop, and he put together a demonstration team. And my first trip through the ski world was to shoot Super 8 film for Allsop, and we went through Montana, Idaho, Washington.
Is that when you consider yourself a hot dogger, about that time?
Yeah. My first year with the hot doggers, I was filming and catching them, but a lot of the stuff I was doing, I was following them, doing POVs, following them down the hill. And as they trained, I was getting chances to jump too. So I got serious about that training. And by 72, 73, I was spending more time trying to do freestyle jumps than I was filming.
You're also an instructor at Crystal Mountain by 73. And thinking about you being a hot dogger, it's kind of like you're on the fringe of one side of skiing, where it's kind of the counterculture kids. But being a ski instructor, that puts you on the other side of skiing. What do you look like at this point?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to look like a hippie. I think I did okay with that. I mean,
your pictures are amazing.
Mustache. But the whole thing about, if you saw that picture of me smiling there, ski instructor on my Crystal Mountain Pass, here's how it goes down, Mike. You show up in November and go through the courses to be a ski instructor, be part of their team, this and that. You get qualified, you get your pass, and you disappear. That's what happened. I never taught anybody anything. I got my ski lift pass, and then I buggered off. And I had a little cabin down the way at the bottom, down at Greenwater. And I didn't show up again. I had my pass. I just had to avoid the guys that ran the ski school now. So that's how I got the ski instructor thing. I was just to get my season's pass so I can go up and hot dog.
So your whole career, it's almost like, I don't want to say you were smarter than everybody else, but you had a different way of doing things where you were still doing all the skiing and stuff that everybody else is doing, but then you had all these other benefits coming to you just because you kind of had street smarts or a hustle.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not trying to blow my own horn, but yeah, I was hustling all the time. And I've always said the only difference between me and all the guys in jail is that they got caught.
Well, and speaking of things where people got caught, when you think about being on the fringe and the whole hot dog movement, While I'm sure everyone assumes that all the hot doggers are stoners and they're experimenting and they're partying, were you guys stoners and were you experimenting and were you partying?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been at a jump up at Alpental where they said, "Who wants to be the four jumper? Who wants somebody four jump?" Somebody sent a bottle of Olympia beer down, threw it down, let it run off, and I thought, doesn't that tell it all? Yeah, smoking pot and drinking this and that was all part of the scene, but I never in my career ever got stoned and performed. And so maybe others did, but no, I always kept a very level head because we were always pushing the envelope. It was only a while we're doing singles before we're doing doubles, and then we're adding a twist to it. And, the day that I look down at the jump and I'm not scared, that's the day I got to quit. So, you need to have fear and you need to respect the fear and sharpen your focus so that you take care of it, because there's been three accidents that I've had to go through in this career. And it's not worth it, to pay the ultimate price to get maimed for life. So although we partied in every possible way, and I'd love to tell how I'm so proud that I left so much hair in so many interesting places around the world. But at the end of the day, 20 years of Volvo Ski Show, I started off every season by saying, I know you guys can do the hottest shit ever and you can do this, that, and the other, but do the stuff that's safe. And at any time at all, you can say, hey, not feeling right to do the double twist and double trip, whatever today. Then you don't do it. And there's no penalty. Your safety is first. And in all of these years there, we've had one guy paralyzed, one guy have his leg busted through his hip. It ended up in his gut, and I had to pull that out, and we had one death. And I wish none of that happened, but this is flirting with the dangers, and that's where it ended.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and I'm going to start this one off with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Peter Glenn has been the one-stop shop for all your ski needs since 1958, and all your snowboard needs since the sport started. And they are all about getting you out on the mountain. Peter Glenn's staff is super knowledgeable and will help you get into the right gear if you're at one of their many locations. But I get it. Not everyone's going to be able to make it to one of their retail establishments, but you can still have a great shopping experience online over at peterglenn.com. The site has all the brands, all the products, and they offer free shipping on orders of $49 or more, a no-hassle return policy, and they'll price match any reputable shop on the web. So if you find a product somewhere else, head on over to Peter Glenn, and if you can't find it cheaper there, they will price match that product that you found somewhere else so you can still support me. On top of that, Peter Glenn supports cool things in snow like this podcast, Johnny Mosley, and many more things. So please support the brand that supports me and check out Peter Glenn before you buy anywhere else. My next sponsor is Stanley, an iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that timeless green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that and a whole lot more these days. They're still all about adventure, they're still all about keeping your beverages hotter or colder than any other product ever created, and they've always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you're still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change for the environment. And I'm making it easier than ever to do. I'm going to save you 30% on all products from Stanley when you head on over to stanley1913.com, buy some stuff. I highly recommend the water bottle and a set of pint glasses. And when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all one word, all lowercase, and you'll save that 30%. My final sponsor is Outdoor Research. They've been building award-winning outerwear and gear in rainy Seattle since 1981. So for 40 years, badasses in the mountains have trusted OR gear to be the highest quality, most functional outerwear on the planet. What's exciting is that these days, the gear is still the best. You cannot compare to the quality of Outdoor Research. But when you head on over to outdoorresearch.com right now, you're going to notice some major differences. While they still make the badass technical gear you trust, they're branching out and they've hired some new designers who have their fingers on the pulse of the market to create new fits, cuts, styles, and colorways. And whether you ski or snowboard or spend your time in the park or the backcountry or the resort, Outdoor Research has something for you. And there's so much new stuff. I'm stoked because on top of their outerwear, their streetwear looks so good too. I want you to wear it all, and I'm going to make it really easy for you to do that because I'm going to save you 25% off all non-sale items over at outdoorresearch.com. And know that this code I'm about to give you, you won't be able to use it on OR Pro products, which is their military stuff. But everything else is game, and you get 25% off the best outerwear on the planet. If you've been out in the terrible conditions in OR gear, you know what I'm talking about. So when you check out at outdoorresearch.com, you're going to enter the code POWEL25. That's all capitals for Powell, the number 25, and there's no spaces in that, and you will save your 25%. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. You are more of an aerials guy than anything. People don't remember you for your ballet. They remember you for being in the air. And in 1974, I think it was, is when this thing becomes a year-round thing for you. Or at least it's when you guys build the first water ramps in the U.S., or at least on the West Coast. And what's the story about the Walt Hitler, not Hitler?
Yeah, Walt Hiltner, right. Yeah, Walt lived down on Lake Washington. We called it Garbage Bay. What's the name of that place? Right outside the UW Stadium. That's where his house was there. And somebody back east had built up a scaffolding thing and roofed it on, put on green meanies slope, and they were jumping into water. And we found out where to get the supplies, and we did exactly that. And so we went down and built a ramp in 74, 5, 6, 7. We built them on his property. And then we went up to Ballinger Lake by Shoreline and started building them up there because we wanted to build them bigger and bigger. But by then, I jumped more than anybody that I knew. I mean, Walt and Stan, the other guys, I start off in the morning, 5 back tucks, 5 layouts, 5 Mobius, 5 doubles. And then I'd go over to the trampoline and cool off, dry up, bounce, then go back and do it again. That's why in 1975, I was on the podiums almost every week, because I just had put in so many jumps that's what it takes.
You're a Washington kid, and skiing's your life. K2's a Washington company that's been at the forefront of what's new in skiing for, it seems like every time there's something new. The performance is already out, so I'm sure you're very familiar with the performers. You're probably buddies with those guys. How do you end up hooking up with the brand K2?
Well, I don't remember the original contact, but the way the ski companies worked back then is they had their guys, their reps that were up finding out who's hot where. So up there at Crystal Mountain, when we're doing our jumps at the top of lift number 1, pretty soon we get approached and say, if you'll use our skis, we'll give you free skis. But if you win in a competition, here's the bonus plan for if you win. So the tours at the time, you probably know, were sponsored by Rainier Beer, and they're called Rainier Snow Bus.
Yep.
Making fun of the word getting busted, which is referenced to Undercultural Life. But anyway, Rainier Snow Bus were the places to pick up money, and you'd pay $25 to get in. If you're on the podium, you'd probably pick up $250. And so we were regularly competing in Snow Bus, and I was immediately making money. K2 came forward, and Solomon was making bindings only at the time, and there's other companies that got involved. But yeah, actually originally Hansen boots before anybody was in the boots. So we had to go around, and getting free equipment was the first milestone of, okay, I'm doing okay. But to get a performance contract that if you get on the podium, that you'd be $50 each time you get on third place, and maybe $100 for and it would scale up. Yeah, all of a sudden it was able to make money, and it started to feel like a profession.
What's the point in your career where it is a profession, where you don't have to work a side job, and pro skiing is, while you may not be buying cars and houses, pro skiing's paying the bills?
Yeah, that happened in the very period you're talking about now. So from 1971, when I graduated from Queen Anne High School, I went up to Alaska and worked the summers to be able to spend the winters up at Crystal Mountain. So it was only the winter of 72 and 73 where that's how I did it. I made the money I made in Alaska is what financed me through the winter. But by 74, I was getting sponsorship money from K2, Solomon, Allsop, Hansen. That was a boot company. They don't even they're around today. So by 74, that was my only career. And then Stan Larsen, who you know, but I don't know if you had much time to look at his story. That guy went straight out of high school. We graduated the same year. And he hooked up with Corky Fowler and was touring around the world with John Clendenin and Airborne Eddie Ferguson and the others, and doing exhibition skiing and what. He was on a global tour thing that by 75, he got Corky Fowler to consider taking me on that. So I made the jump from being the local Northwest skier competing in the snow bus to being on a team sponsored by a cigarette company that was traveling around the world doing really big time promotion work. And by that time, I was making good money.
The tour you're talking about is that Marlboro Tour, I believe.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Back then, it was like you needed to win something big so they could market you as someone important. And in 1975, you do that. You win a Canadian Championships up at Whistler. And then you're put on this Marlboro Tour because they have a title to market you as. And is it like full-on rock star tour where you're on private jets and like you're the Globetrotters?
Yeah, it really was. And I think we were 21, 22 years old at the time. So it wasn't like they were waiting for you to be a marquee person, because in Europe, Formula One was the most dangerous and interesting sport. And Marlboro was the biggest backer of Formula One. In the United States, they had the Marlboro Cowboy, the guy that's sitting there on his horse smoking cigarettes. So that was kind of their platform. But they wanted something to communicate in the wintertime. And I can look back on it now and understand that the marketing prowess behind it was, we want the most dangerous guys doing death-defying things to put our brand next to. And they didn't care what it cost. And so we thought that, oh boy, this is great. We've got a really deep pocket company that is interested in what we do or supporting what we do. And it's hard to say now, but there wasn't a consciousness about cigarette smoking really being bad. It was just like, okay, somebody says it's not healthy, but come on, it can't be unhealthy for me. Look at how strong I am. And it just didn't dawn on us that this is all wrong. And I would just like to say that one of the most profound experiences that I had was I was in Lausanne, Switzerland at Philip Morris's headquarters when they said, everyone to the auditorium. We got a big shot from New York's headquarters. They're going to tell us. We end up in the auditorium, and this guy starts off by saying, 22 years old, 22 years old. And now he's got my attention because I think I was 24. And I started listening. He goes, 22 is the year that we have to focus on. He goes, let me start at 30. At 30 years old, there's a 15% chance that you can start smoking cigarettes. At 25 years old, there's a da-da-da. At 22 years old, there's the highest probability, a chance that somebody would consider smoking cigarettes. We got to get the children before they're 22. And my heart just dropped in my chest. I thought, what the fuck's he talking about? And I went down to the guy that ran all sports for Philip Morris. I sat in his room smoking, waiting for him to come down. Had one, had another one. And then I thought, God damn it, I'm getting so worked up here. This is going to turn into a fight. So I took my last puff and looked at his ashtray in the middle of his mahogany desk and just glided my hand over to the side and put my cigarette out right in the middle of his desk. What the fuck are you guys thinking, sending us around all these ski competitions and exhibitions, having us get up and promote cigarettes to youth? You guys are disgusting. I put my cigarette out in his desk. I walked out of there and I never looked back. I just walked out on my biggest client. It finally dawned on me that we were just pawns and we were just being used to do something really bad.
Wow, that is a pretty heavy thing to realize, especially at 24, that you're going to walk out on the biggest sponsor that you have.
Wasn't easy.
Yeah, because I mean, I've heard those tours are just incredible and like the most fun and the most, I won't say professional, but the most rock star.
Yeah, it was. We were shuttled around in a private jet and, you know, I skied with the royal family of Iran and then whisked up to Finland and skied with royalty there and Sweden. And it was unreal. And there was just unlimited frills and excesses that we thought was normal. But by the end of that, I'd run into a car company, as if moving from cigarettes to cars is like a healthy thing. But yeah, I met Volvo in 77 and I got them to consider investing in the ski world. So I went from Marlboro to Volvo. And then from there, I started throttling back on skiing and throttling up on film production and started doing a lot of work with Barrymore and Warren Miller. So anywhere I went with our Volvo ski team, we'd try to shoot a piece for Warren or for Dick.
Okay, so we got a little bit ahead of ourselves, but I'm going to reel it a little bit back into the mid-70s. You guys are on TV a whole bunch, and there's 4 channels, or probably 3 channels back then. There's not much media coverage, and you guys are on the wide world of sports. So when you're on TV on a Saturday, and there's only 3 channels for people in the world to watch or in the country to watch, is it something that gets you famous? Not overnight, but over a few weekends after people start seeing skiing a little bit? When you go into cities, do people recognize you?
Oh, no, I think you'd have to be on, week after week, maybe be recognized. But, my little claim to fame is when I nervously was getting interviewed at Wide World of Sports for the first time, I didn't know what to say. And I started to say, shake and bake, shake and bake. And that stuck with me for the rest of my life. But you're absolutely right, Mike. With having only 3 avenues of media outlet, then if you can break into any of those 3, everyone gets to see you. So it all happens real fast.
And I guess the whole sport ends really fast, too, at least in the U.S., because it became a thing about litigation, I feel like. And there was a couple injuries. Was it Scott Magrino's injury that really changed things?
Yep, it was on a run called Lookma, the side of that in Vail, Colorado, that Scott Magrino. We had a 3-jump course. And back then we didn't have the knowledge or understanding how important the landing was to prepare it properly. And the mountain maintenance people were crawling all over all the jumps, doing the best they could to keep the takeoff and the landings, more or less with snow on them. And Magrino comes out and was trying to do a single and he over-rotated to his back and would make himself paraplegic.
Yep.
And that was a real shame that he got hurt like that. But the lawsuit that came out, this is 1973, and by 1975, the lawsuit settles. And at that time, in the United States, there was 2 insurance companies that had consolidated all the insurances for all the ski resorts in America. And in 75, they wrote into their insurance policies that if any ski resort had knowledge of a situation where skiers can get their feet above their head, that would invalidate their employees' insurance. So that's the roundabout BS that banned the sport of freestyle skiing in the United States starting in 1976. So it was this language that said if they knew or had knowledge of, skiers were getting their feet above the head. So that was the year that I moved to Europe. And that was such an unfair judgment and ruling put on freestyle skiing that the Swiss Ski Federation said for 1 year they would let any American that was moving from Europe because of this ban, they could ski under the Swiss licensing on the World Cup. And so I did that, and then shortly after that started the ski shows. But it would be more than 10 years so that it would stay banned until snowboarding came around, and you went, hey, these guys get their feet above their head, and it's all good, and everybody wants to do it, and this is the future of sports. And then that bullshit little paraphrasing inside insurance policy just became redundant, and that's how that went.
You take the route of going to Europe, but what happens to the rest of the freestyle communities? That kind of everybody just disband and skiing changes and gets stale again for another 20 years?
Yeah, to me, that's what happened. I was just at the start of not just doing the sport of freestyle skiing, but I was also getting more avid about my film. Yeah, so I wanted to ski and film, and so I followed that. And Airborne Eddie Ferguson, who just passed away recently, he had ski camps in Angel Fire and Crystal Mountain and up in Calgary and Banff over in Europe. There was a lot of traction with freestyle catching on, but when they banned the sport in the U.S., it just lost its momentum here from my perspective.
It went from 1 year to being like, hey, you can't do 360s or flips, and that ruined everything, right? Like people were sick of twisters and spreads.
Well, anything that wasn't inverted was all right. So 360s and twisters and spread, all that, not a big deal. These racers that ran the ski instruction companies, because this was clearly the established racing community, was lashing back who they disliked all the while because we wore cool clothes, we were colorful, and we were having fun. It looks like everybody's smiling. They pushed back hard and they got it banned in the U.S. just under the premise that if your feet get above your head, that's unacceptable. The insurance companies just dished out $5 million on the settlement with Scott McGreen. It was a lot of money back then. Yeah, that's how it got banned.
And then, like you mentioned, you worked your way into film, and then eventually it becomes events and procuring a lot of money. It looks like partnership marketing to me because it looks like you're the money guy for a lot of these big events. And I don't know if the deals happen and then you walk away from them, or you just get money and you're involved in the event from start to finish. But it looks like you're a big event guy for a long time. And the one area that looks like you produced events were the Totally Bored events, and they were big city, big air events. Was that all you and kind of concept and bringing that together?
Yeah, you pretty much got it right there. I mean, the big air event was not my idea at all. This was Andrew Harmont and Aaron Style. And so that event was played out in the Innsbruck Olympic Stadium. And so I went and met with Andrew, and we sponsored it for a couple of years. So we said, well, how can we take this event, just to stick with this Totally Bored that you mentioned, how can we take these events and take them to other cities that aren't alpine cities? And he ran a big operation. And although Andrew came to every single Totally Bored event we ran, because we always had an ongoing discussion about how we would collaborate together, at the end, we sponsored Aaron Style through all these years. But the Nokia company who wanted to bring snowboarding into the inner city, they said, how can we do that? Well, I saw the X Games do an event in San Diego on the beach in the sand and the snow. I thought, okay, who did that? And how did they make the snow? And how did they build the ramp? And based on Andrew Homont's Aaron Style, based on X Games doing an event on the beach in San Diego, I said, we can build ramps anywhere. Here's what it cost. And Nokia said, okay, we'll pay for it. And so we put on events in South Africa and Taiwan. We had a 3-day event in Taipei, Taiwan. It has never snowed there in the history of planet Earth. We built a big air ramp. We had a music stage. It was fantastic, big air ramp. And then we made a public ramp where you can go up and come down in an inner tube. People were waiting 3 hours in line to slide down 200 feet on an inner tube on snow. They'd never seen snow in their life. And in a 3-day period of time, we had over 300,000 people go through there. That was huge. But yeah, so we did these Totally Boards in really unique locations in Warsaw and Germany and Manchester, England, Marseille, France, and just put them in pretty nutty places and tried to bring the culture of cool and hip and rap, and had Run DMC at one, and it was pretty good.
And when you have Run DMC and people like that at events, do you actually meet Run DMC?
Sure. Oh, yeah. We tried to operate events like modules, maybe like a Lego set that everything has to work on its own. So we'd have a music stage, we'd have a skateboard ramp, we'd have the snowboard ramp. And if there's other things that we want, but they're all individual industries on their own. So we had to cut deals with the music industry, wherever it was, the licensing people or the agents to get music artists in, to get the skateboard artists in. We did stuff with Tony Hawk. He was great to work with. Came to our German event. All kinds of guys, inline skating and this and that. So my point being that each one of these operations, it's not like you can just say, oh, I'm going to throw a party. Anybody can show up. No, each one had to be a module that could run on its own and could fail. So if the electrical out, if something happens and the music stage shuts down, all the other stages are still running. They're not connected on the same circuit. So we never had a really traumatic experience in producing these events. They really came off well. I'm very proud of the final product of these Totally Bored events.
And just looking at all the events that you've had your hands in, they're all incredible event lists and incredible resume of them. We could talk about them for days. We're not going to. One thing I didn't really call out that I should is, who is your ski crew? When you look at the best of days, who did you consider your best skier friends?
Well, you mentioned Walt Hiltner. He had the ramp here in Seattle, the ramp party. Walt is one of the most perfect skiers ever. I mean, watching him ski was fantastic. My best buddy is Stan Larsen. He's another graduate of Queen Anne High School. Even today, Stan and I just spent a week in Ogden, Utah, running around Snow Basin and Powder Mountain and this and that. We were ripping the place up, man. And anyway, those would be my two first picks of our ski buddies. But then there's lots of others that didn't go into the competitive world that are from the Seattle area here. And, went to school together. And now we go out on ski trips together. And when I went to Europe in 75, I ended up staying over there for 43 years, based out of there, although I kept a summer house in Chelan. So I got a lot of ski crew, buddies, little posse in there in Europe. My partner in Switzerland, Johan Trendel, my buddy in Sweden, and Knut Simonsson. And every year we have our boys' outings where we go to some unique place and we just let it roll. And just 2 days ago, Mike, we got on the first lift in the morning at Powder Mountain and we rode the last lift at night.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, one thing that we really didn't do in this podcast is tell old ski stories. And I know you have a ton. So let's start with what can happen when you go too big. In 1975, you're in Crested Butte, and I'm sure you go too big on the mountain and off the mountain. Tell us what happens when the really hungover Canadian competitor comes and stands next to you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're talking about Byron Tarchuk. Yeah, back in the day, it was really free and loose. And guys like Byron Tarchuk, who was from Whistler Mountain, he was a real mountain rat. Long, stringy hair, looks like he didn't bathe too often. Always had a smile on his face. And, he had a different drug for every jump. So, he'd be like, yeah, if we're doing stand-ups and twisters and spreads, man, certain kind of pot is good for that. And if I'm doing long layouts, it's acid, man. Anyway, I'd listen to this guy shake my head, go, wow, is this how they make them up in Canada? Anyway, here we are standing at the top of the course in Crested Butte, Colorado. Charlie Pond is running the races, and his crew out of Salt Lake City, these guys were doing acid to kind of liven up their day. And, I'm looking at the starter and the start gate. We're supposed to tell him what jumps we're going to jump, and this guy's just looking around, tripping out, and I'm shaking my head going, oh, shit, here's another stoner. Then Tarchuk starts puking. And I know the guy's hungover. He's hungover every day. He's leaning over, puking, and it's splashing onto my skis. I'm running after him, patting him on the back, going, oh, man, Byron, you got to chill, man. You got to chill. And the starter kind of panics. He gets a little bit freaked out by this whole thing, and he calls down to Charlie Pond. And he goes, Byron Tarchuk's puking in the starting gate. And we hear it come back on the radio. Pond says, if it's food poisoning, send him. If it's a hangover, he's disqualified. And Tarchuk throws his hair back and looks up and goes, it's food poisoning. And they say, okay, send him. And Tarchuk takes a look at me and he goes, I love you, man. And he turns and he heads straight down the in run. I know he's setting up for it. He did flyaway front flips. You take off looking a little bit like Superman.
Yeah.
And watching the guy going, he's got too much speed. And Tarchuk goes into the transition, pops straight up, shoots straight up in the air in a Superman dive. And just as he gets to his apex, he crumples. He just folds. And I go, oh my God, he's passed out. And he had. He passed out on the way up. He goes over like a rag doll and disappears onto the landing. I'm trying to get ready for my jumps, and I'm brushing his puke off my skis, and I'm just trying to get my thoughts together. But anyway, he came out okay. The toboggan came racing in there, and a minute later, he got up on his own, and he moved away. But it was a 3-jump course, and we could call what jumps we were doing at the top. And I had to reorganize my jumps because I was a little bit shook. So I changed my jumps around so that a rattled skier could go off the jumps.
Oh, man, that's an amazing story. And then when things aren't so positive for you, we can fast forward to 1976 and the Snowbird World Championship Finals. And what happens to you? Because I hear that you have to get a priest and call last rites almost.
Yeah, not almost like 3 times. I had just gotten back from the Marlboro Tour in Europe, and I was so confident and jumping so well on my skis that I had my bindings tightened down all the way so they could not come off. And I tell you right now, anybody that's listening, don't do that, no matter how good you is. I just didn't like climbing up the hill for a pre-release ski. So anyways, I got my bindings tightened down. They won't come off. And when I came up short on the third jump in a double somersault, my tips went in and they rebounded instead of me releasing out of my toe pieces. And when they rebounded, I ended up doing a belly flop, and it was not pretty and it hurt. Yeah, and the belly pop had broke things inside my intestines. And so when they got me down to the first aid, we were in Utah, and I heard this phrase where the first aid guy said, "Sir, I'm obliged by Utah state law to advise you that this might be the last day of your life and that you should see a priest.
Holy shit.
May I call you a priest?" And I looked up and I said, "Dude, how about a doctor? Is there a doctor on the menu?" I said, "You got to be shitting me right now. I mean, I've already gone to priest. Let's get a doctor." So they said, "Well, we've got 2 guys over here. Ambulance is coming for this one guy with an arm broken, one guy with a leg. You're going in the ambulance." And so we start down the mountain. We get halfway down Cottonwood Canyon there from Snowbird, and they pull off to the side of the road, and I hear a guy howling. And I go, "Holy shit." The ambulance drivers get out and they run around. There's a guy laying out in the road that's got 2 broken legs. And it was a climber from University of Salt Lake City or University of Utah. He had been climbing by himself, got up too high, couldn't hold on, and he jumped, broke both legs. And he had crawled back to the road and was just crawling up on the road. I ended up getting, them laying him down on the floor next to me on the way down to the hospital. But anyways, as soon as they get me to the hospital, me and this guy are best of buddies because we're in huge pain. The first thing they say to me at the hospital as well is, "It is by Utah state law, we are advised to suggest to you that you need to see a priest, like now." I go, "Oh man, another round of this." So that happened 3 times. But at the end of the day, they were able to find that I had percussion breaks in places that were able to repair. And they were quite right. If it was a spleen or there's other organs that if that was gone, you had no time left. So anyway, that was the old 3 times death warning on the way to Salt Lake City Hospital.
Man, that is scary. And it's a 3-time death warning. And I guess another 3-time death warning that you've had is you've been in 3 avalanches.
Yeah.
What are the stories behind those?
Oh, well, the first one was in St. Anton, and there was an overhang. Another what's up. Skip the overhangs. Overhangs are phenomena that happen when wind comes ripping over the top of the hill and it builds an overhang. Overhangs should not be walked on. Those things break off. Anyways, we were setting up for that. Walt Hiltner had gone down below to look for a camera set up, and I skied down to where I thought was going to signal the skiers to go off. And just as I arrived and stopped at a long overhang location, the entire overhang, tons of snow cracked, and I dropped all of about 15 feet straight at the crack line, and this huge ice ball of overhang went down and took everything off the slope, took some trees down at the bottom. It was crazy, and I was standing there next to an ice wall. On this same film shoot, this was one of those big storms that hits the Alps. I was at the head of a pack of guys. We were tree skiing as we had zero visibility. This is the second avalanche. With zero visibility, and all of a sudden, holy shit, I'm going off an edge down onto a cat track. The last thing I could call out was cat track, and I was falling through space. I couldn't see anything, and when I landed, all the guys that stopped up above me set off all the snow. And the snow came down and piled on top of me until I was down. I think I was 2 to 3 feet under the snow, and I just messed up. And that was the last day that I ever wore ski pole straps on my wrists because I had one pole underneath me. I couldn't move that arm because of the strap. Till this day, don't wear ski pole straps. And then I heard this thud, 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 and I knew it was the guys behind me. They were jumping off the ledge onto the cat track around me, and they started digging, and they got to me fast, and I got out. That was not any fun, but the scariest of all was in New Zealand. We were heli skiing on a place called Black Mountain or something. It was down by Cornet Peak in the South Island. Anyway, again, it was Walt Hiltner, and we had to traverse a very big face to get over to the run that we wanted to shoot. And we knew then only go one at a time across a very dangerous face, so Walt went first. I was going second, and I get about halfway across, and I seemed a little bit dizzy. I said, how is it possible that Walt's going uphill? Well, all the snow underneath me had cut away and was starting to avalanche, and I had a tripod in my hand and a big wooden one and a backpack with the camera gear on. And so my thought, with all my experience of thinking about avalanche, et cetera, was to get my skis going straight. Because I saw everything crumbling up. The speed of the avalanche was starting to pick up. It was a slab slide that was turning into a regular avalanche. And I barely got my skis pointed straight when the breaking up, the froth, kind of like being in a wave on the ocean, it had caught up with me and grabbed me by the back and pulled me down into it. So now I'm laying with my back on the back of my skis, and I'm concentrating on keeping my skis straight, because I've read of how people get one ski and go in one direction, one go another, and they die from getting pulled in half.
Yeah.
So I'm pushing my skis straight, and I'm inside this freaking avalanche now, and it's like being in a wave on the ocean. I just kept straight. My arms are out like art riggers, and then seconds later, all of a sudden, I'm spit out, and now I'm in front, but I'm totally exhausted. I can't get off my tails. So I concentrate on staying straight, and I skied out the avalanche. I just stayed ahead of it, and I just missed some rock faces on the right and left side that if I'd gone off of them, it would not have ended well. So those were the three.
Whoa. So some heavy stuff right there. I guess we should finish this thing off with a great ski story with the legendary Ingemar Stenmark. Do you have a story about him?
Oh, yeah. I dated a girl for years named Kerstin Eklund. She was a classmate of Ingemar. So there was 4 skiers in Ingemar's class up in this little town of Tärnaby, Sweden. And these guys, Stig Strand, Tony Olofsson, Kerstin Eklund, and Ingemar, they were classmates, but all they ever did was ski. Each one of them ended up being phenomenal skiers. And it was May of 1979 that we'd said, hey, we're going to do some heli skiing. It's been snowing for a week or more. And so that's the time of year when they have daylight 24 hours a day. So we're waiting around. I was at Kerstin's house, and then we get a call at 3 a.m. The weather's going to break and the helicopter's going to start picking people up. So helicopters actually came and landed at our houses. We were at remote locations. So they picked up Stenmark first, and Strand was close by him. And then they picked me up and Kerstin. And then we picked up Tony in a ski resort called Hemaven. And we flew off to a mountain peak called Okstenden in Norway. And this is the highest peak in the north of Norway. And but we circled this thing, and it's now 5 a.m. The sun's up, and there's a ton of snow on it. And this thing is just vertical. I mean, this is Alaska kind of vert. And the helicopter bounces a couple times on the top to see if anything wanted to let loose before it let us off. And then the place where it let us off, it couldn't quite land. It hovered, and we had to hop out onto the side of the mountain that had snow on it. And we strapped on, and there was 2 other guys there too. Tony Olofsson had some instructors from his school. He was the 4th guy. So the other guys that weren't the World Cup skiers, they strap up and they take off right away. I'm waiting to see what Stenmark's going to do. And my girlfriend, Kerstin, she takes off, and Tony takes off. And then I was waiting there, and Stenmark looks at me, and I'm him. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And then he points out to the face where it's ridiculous that snow is even sticking onto this face. He goes, I'm going out there. Like he's on his own. I thought, well, fuck, you're not on your own, buddy. I'm right behind you. So we slipped out onto this face, the steepest thing I've ever been on. My right leg was extended all the way down. It was so steep that my left ski, my knee was up into my chest. My left hand was resting on the snow high above me. I mean, this shit straight down. And the only way to get a turn off is that you needed to push yourself away from the steep slope, pull your tails up to the back of your butts, drop your tips down, and just switch positions and get into that tuck position where you have your one ski all the way down, the other knee up in the chest. And the first 3 or 4 turns was, we were seriously just hopping off of nearly a wall. And, Stenmark was just ahead of me. And when you step out like that, you drop 10 feet. And you get like, holy God, I hope I hold on. And so we had those first 4 or 5 turns that were just hairy like heck. But then it started to level out a bit into just a normal powder ski run. And there I was eating the froth behind the greatest skier in the world. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, man, you have lived one incredible life. And that is the podcast. And now it's time for one of my favorite parts of the podcast. It's Inappropriate Questions. And I was lucky enough to get one of your best friends, a guy that's come up in the podcast a bunch, Stan Larsen, to ask the questions.
Oh, my God.
He was a hot dogger. He was a winner of some European freestyle championships that I can't remember. He's a longtime K2 athlete, and he's an awesome, awesome guy. I made the K2 50-year movie with him and got to spend a lot of time with Stanley. He came up with 4 questions for you, and he knew that he had the ability to upset you with questions, and he made sure he's not going to upset you with any questions. He's going to feed you some layups that happen to be inappropriate as well. So let's go with the first question from Stanley Larsen.
You bet.
Tell them about the first lunch you had on your first trip to Europe.
All right. Does that ring a bell?
Oh, yeah. Does it ring a bell? We get off the plane in Geneva, Switzerland. It's 7 in the morning. We get whisked off to Lausanne, which is the Philip Morris headquarters of Europe. They tell us, hurry up and change. You're going to be meeting up with the rest of the Marlboro World Championship team. I'm not even checking in at the hotel. And there's a guy in the audit, sitting there in the lobby playing a piano, and he's playing this song. And I went over and stood next to the piano. At the end, I said, what was that? He said, that was Dave Brubeck's Quartet, Take 5. And that became the theme of my life. But Stanley's asking about when we left that reception and walked over to this restaurant. There's this smell. They got, what is going on here? I've yet to have a meal in Europe. We go in, and it's this restaurant with this odor that you can't believe. We sit down at the table, and there's 3 guys sitting there in front of us, and we kind of say hello. I see one that doesn't speak English at all. One speaks English kind of well, and the other one is obviously an Englishman. So I start picking up the conversation with the Englishman, going, these guys are like, what? Are they mogul skiers? Are they jumpers or acrobats? I don't know. And I come along, asking the guy vague questions, going around in circles, and finally ask him, so what do you do? Because we're a little bit taken back that Marlboro didn't tell us that they were going to put us together with 3 European freestylers, right?
Right.
And this guy says to me, I'm a driver. And I go, oh, thank God. He said, and I tapped Stanley sitting next to me, and I said, Stan, they're chauffeurs. And I'm thinking, so the Marlboro executives haven't shown up yet. So I said, so who do you drive for? He goes, I drive for Ferrari. And then he realizes that I don't know who he is. And then he nods to the guy to his left. And he goes, he drives for McLaren. So does this guy. I'm talking to James Hunt, the 1975 Formula One world champion. Sitting next to him is Emerson Fittipaldi, the 1974 world champion. On the other side is Niki Lauda. He will be the 1976 world champion. We're sitting there with ultimate Formula One royalty. Ron Howard just did a film like 5-6 years ago called Rush. And it was about this exact year when these 3 guys fought it out on the Formula One tour. So I go, holy smokes, these guys is Formula One royalty. And just about then, the waiters come in and put a plate in front of us, and it's a little yellow ball of bubbling cheese. And now I know where the bad smell's coming from. We were at a raclette restaurant. We were having a gourmet raclette lunch, and it would become one of my favorite foods of my life.
That's an amazing story. We're going to jump into Stanley's second inappropriate question.
What about the time we stopped in Beirut, and why did we leave so fast?
Beirut, 1976. We had just finished 2 weeks in Tehran in the mountains of Iran, and it was January 1st. We were flying from Tehran back to Zurich, and we had no idea that the plane was going to stop Beirut. We have rather light hangovers, we should say, and I was asleep with my head against the window, and all of a sudden the stewardess is waking me up. Sir, you need to sit up and open your windscreen. We will only be in Beirut for a very short while. I go, where? And this is 1976, Beirut. There's a war. The Lebanese war is on. I lift up my shade as we're coming in to the Beirut airport. We're passing over the top of the Hilton Hotel. It's on fire. There's militia up on the roof shooting their machine guns into the street. And I'm going, holy shit, I hope they don't think it'd be fun to just pick off that airplane that's coming in over. As we sweep down into the Beirut airport, Jeeps with guys with machine guns are racing along beside us as an escort. We haven't even landed yet. We touch down, and the Beirut airport is on the Mediterranean Sea right there in the harbor. We land and roll down to the end, far away from where the terminal building is. These military Jeeps come racing out to us, running around. The captain comes out. They open the door. There's no gates. He throws down a package. They throw up a package. They close the doors. And he turns around, tells everybody, stay in your seat, stay in your seat. The Jeeps part ways, and we turn around, and the captain comes on. And he goes, I want everybody to hold on. We are going to take an exceptionally steep climb out of Beirut. And this guy hot breaks it at the end of the runway, and those engines just run, the entire plane's shaking. And he lets go of those brakes. We start down the runway, and he puts that thing on its tail and does a hard bank to the right out over the Mediterranean. Thought I was going to shit myself. We were absolutely powering out of Beirut. There was a war on, and apparently we picked up a diplomatic pouch or something. Yeah, that's the Beirut story.
Well, we could do these all day long. They're amazing. Now we're going to go to his next inappropriate question.
Tell me how a car slid down the ice almost into the crowd, a pinwheel almost burned the little kids, and an aerial ski pierced the hood of a car. How did that turn into a 20-year global sponsorship?
This is typical Stan Larsen fashion, where he takes a couple of stories and he blends them together. So this is fine. He's my buddy. I love him. So our very first show for Volvo, we would do the choreography list before we went out and did the actual show. So we were sitting around with a bottle of whiskey the night before, which is pretty much standard procedure, and a little doobie on the side. And as our courage was getting wound up, instead of starting off with a single, we were starting off with a double. And that means the next jump was a triple. And so by the time we'd finished the whiskey and this and that, we were up to doing opening with quads. And everybody was going on high testosterone. Well, we start this show, and about 2 or 3 jumps into the show, we had a local car dealership in Sweden put a car on the side of the hill, and he really didn't want to do it because it's up in the snow and it's up in a pet, this and that. I had to do a 4-time twister on this jump. That means you got to seriously get started right off the kicker. And so going off the jump, I went up in the air, and the first twist hit so hard that I pre-released a ski, and it went flying off in the direction of the car display. Well, here I am sailing through the air. I'm worrying about landing on one ski. But the ski that went off towards the car hits the car on the back, windmills up over the top, hits the hood, and goes down off the front. And I crashed, of course, on the landing and this and that. So I get my ski back. We finished the show. And at the end of the show, I learned that a woman came out of the crowd, and she said, "Who's from Volvo? Who's from Volvo?" And this guy was almost in tears because he did not want his car from his dealership up on the hill. And he kind of goes, "Yeah, I'm from Volvo." And the woman says, "I want that car. Don't touch any scratches. I want to remember this day. I want to have that car." And I sold my first Volvo. Then he mixed it with another story that happened. The last thing Stanley mentioned was a show in San Sicario, Italy, where we had a hot air balloon with a fireworks display that was set up on the bottom of it. It was supposed to shoot out sideways over the crowd, and something to do with the rigging collapsed. And when they lit the fireworks board off for all the fireworks, they all shot straight down into the crowd. And, when a firework takes off up into the sky, it runs until its propulsion stops running, then it explodes. These things hit the ground, hit the snow, and were shooting around the feet of our audience and then exploding. And we finished that show as fast as we could, packed up, and drove through the night to get out of Italy. We thought, we cannot be in this country because we're going to all end up in jail if somebody got hurt at that show. That was Stanley's pick.
All right, and we gave him a bonus question, so I'm going to let him ask it now, and we'll cut it if it's not good because I don't remember what it was. But here is Stanley's final inappropriate question.
Okay.
Tell me about the time you drove a car into the bleachers of an Olympic stadium just so you could see the flame.
Yeah, this is more like amazing than inappropriate. But so we had a day off in northern Italy. We were up in the Dolomite Mountains, and the 1976 Olympics were happening in Innsbruck. So we said, hey, let's grab one of the cars and go to Innsbruck. So we did. And we descended down into Innsbruck. And remember, 4 years earlier, they had that terrorist event at the Munich Olympics. Mm-hmm. And so for the first time ever, there was a lot of military around. So we thought, oh, this is pretty strange. We can't get in here. We can't get in there. So we said, let's head back to Italy. But there's the big Olympic stadium. That's the one where the Air and Style event has been hosted at every year. And that's where the Olympic torch is. The cauldron is in that stadium. So we drove up to the stadium. There's nobody at the front door. So we drive to the front door. There's a walking path. We drive down the walking path. Now we drive into the stadium. We drove a car into the Olympic Stadium. All the security was down in town. Nobody was up blocking the venue. I tell you, you wouldn't get within a mile of that venue today. We drove up underneath the cauldron of the Olympic flame while it was burning during the Olympics in 1976. And we took pictures of ourselves there. And we turned around and drove out looking at each other going, dude, how did we ever get away with this? This is like so against the rules and so inappropriate.
Well, that is an amazing story, and that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And just hearing about your life and times, I mean, they're so awesome that you were kind of grew up with the freestyle aspect of the sport, lined up perfectly. And while you were kind of a rebel and a rule breaker and not one to do what the status quo wanted you to do, you were always like a rebel with a cause. You always had something going on with an end goal. It's like, hey, yeah, I'm going to hitchhike up here and I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do this to ski. And everything seemed to work out for you, but it wasn't a traditional way to find your way into the ski industry. It's not like your family was a bunch of skiers. And while you may have been the redheaded stepchild of your whole family back then, I'm sure they look at you now and look at your life and times and they're like, wow, Phil really lived.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's very kind of you to say those things. And yeah, I feel I don't want to say blessed, but I feel really lucky. And like I said, I've left a lot of hair in a lot of really interesting places and not just rotating under sheets. But, I want to thank you for doing the podcast like this because, to hear from the different people that I was listening to, Greta not long ago and Mike Adams, and to hear other people's story in the ski world fills in so much for me. The athletes and the different persons that you interview, their lives were so parallel and they just brushed onto it. It's so great for me to be able to hear other people's stories and how they were getting so much done during these same decades. So I appreciate very much the POW movement. I'm feeling a POW movement right now.
So that was time with Phil Sifferman, and that dude can tell a story. And like I said, he's a rebel with a cause. He was a true rule breaker, but he always had reasons for the rules he was breaking, and they usually made sense. And really, Phil's one of those guys that I could go on and on for hours with, just hearing the crazy stories that he had throughout his career. I mean, he's a walking history lesson, and I know we left out a bunch of stories, one with the Shah of Iran and his daughter. We didn't tell the full story of Shake and Bake, but what we did get was a look into the industry back then in a way that only someone who had been there can tell it. And I did a podcast with Marco Shapiro last year, and while it was awesome and I love Marco, he was kind of grumpy. And while I got some good stories out of him, I didn't think I was going to do too much more with the hot dog era skiers. But I had chatted with Phil a while ago, and we had a plan to do a podcast, and I'm a man of my word. I stuck to my word. Phil and I got an interview done, and I'm glad we did, as I really love this one. And you can bet that there are going to be more hot doggers in the future. The next one's going to be with Stanley Larsen this spring, and like Phil, Stanley isn't afraid to tell how it really was. So it's going to be another great chat with one of Phil's best friends. I hope all of you enjoyed that chat with Phil as much as I did. Now I'm going to ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on. If I read your review on the show, you're going to win a limited edition POW Movement item. This week's review comes from Ski Like You're Still 20. The title is Best Ski Podcast, and it's a 5-star review, and here is the review. What a better way to take your mind off skiing while at work by listening to a ski podcast at work. Mike has the ability to show how human these athletes are. He makes them feel approachable, and I like that. Mostly, I believe this is due to his interviewing skills. He keeps humor alive while asking a lot of hard and at times personal questions, and I doubt these athletes would be willing to answer those questions if it was someone other than Mike. Thank you for that review. That means a lot, and I appreciate it. And you can email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will send you a Powell Movement limited edition camo hat. It is pretty sick. I wear one almost every day. I'm actually wearing one right now. I have one final ask for all of you. Please support the brands that make this show happen. They are Puffin Drinkware, Best Day Brewing, Elan Skis, Outdoor Research, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Stanley. Have a great week, everyone.